So this is Roundtable number 2. It takes a little bit different slant, but most of the same topics are going to come up, so we get a chance to explore them deeper and wider. I'd like Susanna Kass, please, to introduce herself as the moderator for this roundtable and her 2 fire starters, and we'll begin the conversation there. Thank you. Susanna.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. Our Roundtable 2 panel is going to be me more listening than talking. I am surrounded with industry luminaries here. Many of them, I actually admire them from afar. I read their blog. I learned from them. And it's truly a pleasure for all of us to be here discussing about something that we're passionate about, which is smart data center and sustainability. For me, I have a very humbling background. I just spent 30 years in the IT industry, worked for a computer company that 2 out of 3 are being swallowed by the bigger guys who are also providing cloud. One company is called Sun Microsystem, which is actually part of now Oracle, as you probably heard. The pleasure of it is my company currently now, Baselayer, it's hosting their, using our technology to host their cloud computing initiative. So it's sort of like a nice round way to connect it up with Sun in somehow. For those of you who remember Sun Microsystems. The second company I ever worked for is Hewlett Packard. I'm Chinese, so of course when somebody offered me a job to live and work in Hong Kong, I'm like there. And I packed up my bag for HP, and I lived there for 7 years. Went back to Hong Kong and run Asia Pacific Managed Services as a general manager. I learned significantly from them. More importantly is you never beat a Japanese golf on a golf course. And it was a lot of fun working for Hewlett Packard with Yokogawa, NTT, and many of the premier clients, which currently now are represented here, especially Dave's company. Equinix is also swallowing up many of the international sites, so it's great to see them there. I spent some time operating data center, because after all, spent some time selling them the technology. It's more fun to actually operate them. So I joined eBay. I ran eBay as a COO for the international for 7 years. It was a lot of fun in terms of going around the world citing data center. So again, I learned from gentlemen like Gary Damasi, who you heard earlier, that he has his team really done an impressive job for what they have done. Especially, it was not difficult to actually cite data center around the world. And I can't say enough about great things that he have done. So I went and then head up energy because of my daughter, who have the millennial generation. They focus more on saving the world because their parents pay all their bills, so it's easy for them to do so in their business model. But I really have a lot of fun. So I work for Nestera Energy as head of innovation for a couple years. Nestera, for those you haven't heard, is actually owned by FPL, Florida Power and Light, and they focus on providing renewable energy. So it's absolutely a privilege to actually have Kelly on the panel because she's going to talk more about that today in terms of how innovative and disruptive that is. So for some of you who haven't heard about the term PPA, we may talk about that. That stands for Power Purchase Agreement. Many of the company uses that to basically do a contract for differences for the energy that they actually use, which is dirty, and then they try to help out the world by building more renewable and data farm. And I think you will have some executives here on the panel that's going to talk about how renewable is going to upset the grid, and then how they're going to balance out and harmonize it, and maybe some of the standard. So make the long story short, I can't really keep a job, you can tell, because I move around so much. So now I'm with Baselayer as a startup. I met them actually in my class, which I co-teach at Stanford, on strategy and sustainability. I have tremendous respect for this company, and I spent 2.5 years basically studying them around the world on the global footprint of Goldman Sachs, which is basically a client, around the global footprint. Systematically, how they decided to convince a client, in my opinion, is the cheapest, richest company in the world to basically implement data center. So, and I study evidence-based framework at Stanford, so it's a systematic framework in terms of how it is being done. So with that, need no introduction. I'm actually somebody that read about what somebody have done. the gentleman who actually did a lot of the work at Baselayer, and now with Salesforce is actually one of our fire starters. So Patrick Flynn actually did a lot of the work that I actually handed up to be after him at Baselayer and study about, from a framework perspective, the orchestration on how he has done. So Patrick Flynn, for those of you who haven't done it, if you have a mobile, I'm not going to tell you to shut it down. Actually, if nothing else, I encourage you to go to Patrick Flynn's blog. He is very active, very passionate, a wonderful individual. Just did phenomenal work under Mark Benioff and Salesforce.com. So maybe I should take a show of hands here. How many of you out there in your company is actually using Salesforce.com? Give me a show of hands. Maybe I should ask the question, how many of you are not using it, right? Okay. So Patrick and I chatted, oops, sorry about that. Patrick and I chatted a little bit. What I thought would be more helpful is instead of him talking about all the results and the work he's done, which I encourage you to visit the blog, it's actually more importantly to understand about the framework on the strategy that he actually implemented, both internally, how he can actually mobilize leaders in his organization that oftentimes may be focused on the single bottom line, but may not be the double bottom line, and how he actually successfully brings so many of the project in place, such as when he was at Baselayer, did that for Goldman Sachs, and now did it worldwide footprint for Salesforce.com. And then after he does that, I thought it would be very important for us to listen and learn his goal and his vision in driving the industry forward, including some of the activity as an underwriter and a sponsorship, and many of the words that I think I'll just let him speak to it in terms of influencing the industry. Because this is not about just doing it for yourself. It's actually more about how you actually can be successful in demonstrating an example, especially in this trying time right now with our current administration. We have a lot of stress tests, and who knows who's going to tweet what next that is actually going to go damper some of the spirit that we're all going to have as we continue to actually demonstrate growth. So I thought we'd start with the fire starter one, Patrick Flynn, and let him take this away to talk about some of the strategy and framework for his success in his execution. Please, Patrick.
Thanks, everybody. First, how about a round of applause for the DCD folks for pulling this together today? As a great sign of the success of the first panel, I have far too much to try to squeeze in here. I'll try to stay on track and keep it brief. But I thought that the first discussion earlier was fantastic. I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody else up here has to say. I started my career doing HVAC engineering for high-rise buildings, some data centers, and that's where I got the hook firmly implanted into me for sustainability. And the reason was, you look across all of these infrastructure projects, and people are metaphorically lighting money on fire everywhere you look. Inefficiency, misaligned incentives, miscommunications, and there's an economic force that is largely untapped when you look across different places in infrastructure. From the engineering side, I went to work for a clean tech VC, really interested in software-driven energy efficiency. Can we build the fire extinguisher out of software to put out these fires that we're creating across buildings, data centers, all of our infrastructure? After that, I went to work for IO and Baselayer because office buildings and conference buildings are great, but digital infrastructure is the biggest opportunity of our time for any of that sort of work. From there, about a year and a half ago, I joined Salesforce. My role there now is to think about how do we take the innovative capabilities, Forbes is Innovator of the Decade. How do we take one of the most innovative companies in the world with a willingness to explore how business can be a force for good and realize that potential across our global platform, whether that's our office design, infrastructure, events, employee engagement. How do we realize the potential of Salesforce as the environmental leader in the world? My team and I don't make the decisions about data centers in the end, or offices, or anything much for that matter. We just try to be in the right place at the right time with the right advice to try to move the business ever so much in the right direction. And one of the frameworks I like to think about there is that of you've got the world in the state it is currently, whether that's your business, your life, your level of fitness, anything, the current state and the future state. And you're trying to get, in this case, a business to reach a new future state, and all you have to operate with is a rubber band. And if you pull too hard, the rubber band breaks. If you pull too softly, you're not doing your job. And so folks in my position, thinking about driving change in organizations, especially on the environmental front, I think spend a lot of time thinking about just how much to pull, how hard, and in what direction. That direction piece is important too. And one of the approaches I take is, let's at least agree on the North Star. We may not agree on the next step, and we may not agree on how hard and how fast. But can we agree that eventually we want to be here? A data center, for example, powered by 100% renewable energy. And not even just over the course of a year it's going to consume energy amount X and we're going to procure renewable energy at Y, X, then they're equal, but powered in time by renewable energy at all moments. I also think about North Star in terms of developing corporate strategy around sustainability. How much should we focus on employee engagement versus data centers? As a cloud company, energy is our primary input. The cloud runs on electricity. You all know this. And the primary value chain in which we operate starts with some sort of fuel source. And today, believe it or not, we still get our energy from digging up long dead plants and animals and lighting them on fire. That energy gets delivered to a data center. The data center provider delivers it to your IT equipment. IT equipment does some sorts of conversion. And at the end, you've got information. We are an energy or an electron refinery. We're a consumer of refined electrons at the server, and we provide high-value information out to our customers. That's the primary framework that I think about in terms of driving change across our primary value chain. And we sit in a particular part of that. And so where do we have direct control? Where do we have indirect control? I'm sure Kelly will talk a bit about the colo buyers principles. How do we think about our position, and how do we use that to pull on the rubber band, direct change and indirect change? Those are some of the frameworks. Now, I want to give a shout out to Mark from the first panel, because what he did is something I think all of us need to do, which is be bold and talk in superlatives. We know what's going on in the world. Most people outside of this room don't see all that's happening. And so in all times when you're describing the industry you're in, this industry, let's be bold, let's be big, let's talk about how important this is. And I want to just spend a few minutes conveying my passion and why I think this is the most important industry to be a part of right now. And it has to do with size, timing, and hope. So size. One of my teachers once asked me, what's the biggest thing in the world? And we guessed around and landed on the North American electric grid. All of that copper interconnected from coast to coast. That's no longer it. Now it's our information system. All of the visible and invisible connections that we're making from our devices. Take Voyager 2, now 20.2 billion miles away. That is a Internet of Things endpoint. Its job is to gather information and send it back to Earth. As far as we ever send anything into space, as big as we ever build anything here on Earth or elsewhere, we're going to tether it to and wrap it in our web of interconnected information infrastructure. What we are a part of building is the biggest thing humans will ever build. This is very, very big. And timing. We are building it now. This is still the dawn of the creation of mankind's biggest thing ever, our magnum opus. And we have the responsibility to see the big picture and build it responsibly. Here's why I'm hopeful about that. One, information plus incentives equals change. We can provide the information, that's our core competency. If we think hard about market forces, we talked about utility regulation, we talked about being a part of a value chain. If we can provide the right incentives, we can drive change. Next up is that we have the ability to make this thing ever more moral, okay? So picture a factory floor 100 years ago. The production equipment didn't have any means of reaction or decision. It wouldn't stop if a life were in danger or if pollution were getting problematic. We have fixed that. All it took was building our digital control systems and our models to be more encompassing. We decided life was important, and so we protected it automatically. Modern factories perceive problems imperceptible to humans and automatically react. We can create the behavior that we want. We're about to start mining asteroids. We can solve moving signals to modify workload to respond to straining utilities. And that, I think, is the most hopeful thing. We are sitting on top of the most liquid form of energy demand humankind has ever seen. We can move demand for digital work at near the speed of light. We can move where the grid is more reliable. We can move where the sun is shining. We can move to failing economies where a beleaguered businessman whose assets sit idle might see an unexpected overseas paycheck. We can move digital demand for work at the speed of light. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the best utility customer used to look like one that was steady. Now the best utility customer is going to look like one that creates destructive interference, that can respond and make the overall system more steady. We want to ramp up load when it's needed and bring it down when it's needed. And that's at our fingertips. It's a capability we can achieve. With information and incentives, we can do it, and it will be the biggest financial arbitrage opportunity in our lifetime. So if it's not the environment and it's money that gets you going, that should be motivation enough. Hopefully that was a bit of a fire.
Thank you, Patrick. That was very helpful. With that, actually, I'd like to lead with two other panelists on this side of the table, who I actually recently met. Very, very impressed with, I think they're actually more the grandfather in the cloud computing industry. So we're all actually here to learn from each other. So it's absolutely a pleasure that I'd like to introduce two speakers from Infomart and also Aligned Energy. So how many of you have actually heard of Aligned Energy and Infomart? Give me a show of hand. Okay, great. So one of the leaders told me what he'd like to talk about today is actually similar to what Patrick said, but in a different way, and it's actually very profounding, innovative, is choices, that we also like to actually have choices. So may I lead with that? And you can give us an example in terms of what might be the framework, Don, that you'd like to discuss in terms of choices. And then would that be okay? Great.
Go to John?
Yep.
Hi, my name is John Sheputis. Thank you, and thanks for saying that. Except for the word grandfather, I'm not quite there yet. My kids are only 10 and 13, so it's probably a little ways off.
How about Godfather?
But that metaphor works for us because I still think we're early. There were some comments on the prior panel that talked about what's going to be the big force of change and what would be the preferred force, and I think the market. We are in an evolving state. We have tremendous advantages for energy smart. In the United States, I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful for the global internet revolution, information revolution, but there is a relationship between geography and the use of technology. And, everything we do rests upon a series of laws and infrastructure. The energy infrastructure in the United States, for whatever you may think about it, it's pretty damn good. The laws here around digital rights and privacy management, at least they're, you can argue that there's some places where they're unclear, but there is a precedent to protect information. And that's why so much of it is stored here. And there is a respect within the United States for the free functioning of markets. If I thought about what a data center is, Infomart is a wholesale provider, and I'll spare you the commercial. We like to think we're at least a leader or an early adopter of a lot of forms of sustainability and efficiency, and that's how we distinguish our buildings and as places for people to do wholesale computing. But when we think about where to put these places, we give a lot of thought to where they should be. And one of the key things, I think it's been said here already, is we are I'm going to steal this phrase. I didn't hear Patrick lay claim to it. So we are an information refinery, right? We don't take ownership of the data, but the data takes on new value. In a sense, we're computing utility power into computing power and selling that in some form of capacity. And so what we look for is choice, right? We look for utilities that understand that a data center is a unique consumer. It can participate in demand response. And I think good data centers and good utilities will partner in that in one way or another. And they'll also offer more choice, right? One of the things that we hear a lot about is, do you operate efficiently and do you consume, low carbon power in one form or another? And I think there's an absence, or at least there's an inconsistency of choice around the country. And I think one thing I'd like to see is more of that. Because once you give people the power to make choices, you'll get more data. And they'll make, we fundamentally believe that, right now, in our facility here in California, we are procuring 100% renewable power. And we're not doing it via an offset, and we're not buying credits. We applied in 2010 to participate in a program of limited direct access, form of deregulation, where we were allowed to bypass the utility, PG&E, great utility, but we wanted to exercise our own choices. And so now we are buying 100% renewable power. And we're getting that physical delivery of that to our and we're paying a small premium for it. The delivered cost is around 10 cents. Of that, about 0.6 of a cent is essentially the renewable premium. So here's my marker for the future. Paying for renewable power is worth at least 6% more. In the future, I expect that number to come down. But the only reason we can do that, is because we found a place and a utility partner, and we we went to the effort to procure the choice and then use it. And I think that has value. We don't get any more rent for it. I wish we did. We have to compete in the market too. But we think the power of choice is worth it.
Thank you very much, John. And with that, I think we will have Jakob share with us as the founder and vice chairman of Aligned in terms of your strategy of execution and your vision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much. So when we started the company 6 years ago, the thinking behind it was, much to kind of your comments, Patrick, is that if you look forward in compute and just the level of inefficiency that's happening, we look at a landscape going forward where water is much more constrained than it is today. The world of compute is following eyeballs in hot, flat, crowded parts of the world that can't use airside cooling systems. And if you look at compute today, 5x of your average on the latest chips is all dynamic and frequency clocked, right? So if you look at next generation compute loads, we're talking about really going to much more dynamic on-off compute. And if you step back and look at traditional mechanical systems, traditional electrical systems, they're not reliable, sustainable, or efficient under those loads. So the core kind of impetus in starting Aligned was, how do we deliver that infrastructure as a utility that can keep up with those market forces and deliver a differentiated business model? One of the things, to the comments of the earlier roundtable that we're very focused on, and some of the things that you guys just spoke about, is if you look at solar, it's an absolutely wonderful thing, right? Green energy, wind, Wonderful. Solar's growing at 40% per year, which means it's doubling every 2 years. Data center growth is growing at 15%. Those are completely, to your point, non-correlated sources. The grid frequency, if it gets out of alignment between supply and demand, you either increase or lower frequency, which does all kinds of things to turbines in the back end, as the utility guys in the former panel will tell you. And this is a major issue staring down the data center industry, because a lot of great cloud players are doing wonderful things by building more data centers and buying non-correlated green energy loads, and there's a complete, mismatch between those things. So that's something that we started developing technologies for about 4 years ago, and we'll be launching kind of what we call next generation on the electrical side, specifically addressing how do we solve for frequency issues on the grid that are induced by kind of that mismatch.
Thank you very much. So with that, I think maybe we'll talk a little bit, we'll go to the utility. I have two friends on the panel today, both Tod and Tim, representing SCE and Imperial. So may I have a show of hands? How many of you have actually heard of Imperial Utility and know where it is at?
Imperial, Zero County.
Ah.
Yay.
Well, we got two hands, three, I think, right? Yeah. Oh, no, that's more. There's two more on that side.
Over here.
All right.
Over here.
Oh, over there too. Well, you almost make it to single digit, Tim, in terms of your brand awareness. Many of you have actually not known, Imperial is actually in California, and he actually have about 15,000 megawatt of renewable energy. So, which is, I think what we like to, and Tim likes to actually be here at the data center, and thank you again, Bruce, for actually extending the invite. So Tim, without further ado, how about tell us a little bit more about this hidden jewel you have in California?
Sure. Thank you, Susanna. And I think someone referred to that where the sun shines, there's going to be solar power. Well, in the Imperial Valley, the sun shines a lot. And we have an untapped resource, although it's becoming tapped more as we speak. I think we have close to 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts now in development in the Imperial Valley. Maybe most people know it by all the agricultural products that come out of the Imperial Valley. As the Colorado River water is diverted, you probably may not realize that the melons you're eating and the carrots and the onions and many of those products were actually grown by farmers in the Imperial Valley. So we have a large rural territory, and that rural territory is fairly hot and sunny because it's in the middle of a desert. But we're seeing a tremendous growth in solar power in this region, and at prices that just keep dropping every year. So someone talked about a 10-cent renewable power, where we're seeing on the development side 2.5 to 3.5 cent fixed prices for 20 years. And,
Can you repeat that rate again?
Yeah, 2.5 to 3.5 cents is what developers will sell their solar energy for. Now that has to get translated into utility rates.
Like
And,
in California?
yeah, that's in California.
Look out, Quincy.
So, because there's cheap land, there's water, and there's lots of sun. So it's a perfect nexus for solar power. There's also lots of geothermal and other renewables, but probably today the biggest development that we're seeing is in the solar. So, and we're also, to go with the solar, solar and batteries seem to go together. I think that more people are becoming aware of large batteries. We just installed a large battery system, and that gives us the flexibility. As people talk about the intermittency and the frequency issues and the voltage issues, those large batteries can operate very, very quickly and help mitigate all those issues associated with those intermittent renewables, so that you can have low-cost renewables and reliable power.
Thank you, Tim. So some of the work that I've actually learned from my leader at Stanford, a gentleman named Joe Schneider, who I wish actually he can be here. He implemented the strategy at Stanford called SCSI. And we are open book at Stanford in terms of talking about how we actually implement the entire campus actually using renewable energy. Some of the key lessons I learned from him indeed is actually not just think about solar when the sun shines, is actually utilizing disruptive technologies such as energy storage or geothermal and whatnot, that you can actually have it around the clock, and hopefully with some help with Jakob, and very exciting that he's piquing our interest about the future launch that he's going to do, that actually we can be not misaligned but aligned. I think that would be great. So with that, actually, I also like to go to the end of the table, my friend Tod from Southern Cal Edison. You heard about Leanne earlier, who did a great job on sharing her strategy. Tod actually have a tough job. He actually goes out there and talks to a lot of data center folks and people like me who are completely blissfully ignorant. Back in the days when I was at eBay, would actually not take Tod's call when he actually started talking to me about a program. As much as intellectually, which I think I have an average IQ, that I get it in terms of saving eBay millions of dollars if I were to sign up that program, but I still won't do it. So what's causing that gap in terms of mind, intellectual, and I said execution? I think that's something that Tod can share with us a little bit about SCE demand response program, and how the network strategy can be played out. So you all out there in the data center folks, do not run away when utility talk to you about demand response. You genuinely have to ditch your old thinking and not operate in status quo, because you can actually have the cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tod.
Sure, and we're very excited about that. I mean, for years talking to data centers, right? You have to have power 24/7, and you need fast internet, and you need affordable prices and reliability, right? And I really like what Patrick said, that, you know, there's so much inefficiency out there. And the future of load growth and all this, it's very exciting, because now we have these renewable sources of power, we have all battery storage, we have different devices, Internet of Things, electric vehicles, autonomous, all this stuff is kind of coming together for the utility and the data center world to try to balance that out and to use all those things efficiently. And where demand response was typically, you know, you never wanted to say that word. I mean, DR meant disaster recovery to the data center world, right? So they didn't, that was the first thing, like, what is this? But now it's more exciting, because now we have this flexibility through our technology, through our grid, that we can manage these loads. Things can be turned on and off. Things can be moved to other locations. You know, I'm foreseeing in the future, there'll be a network of places that are backing each other up. And so if you've got a constraint over here, you know, and demand response is for two things. It's either for reliability, something went down, we lost some generation or whatever it may be that caused that disaster, or it could be a price point, right? We want to have our prices as low as possible. If you have the ability to adjust, you're going to be able to benefit from that. And so you need to balance all of those things together, and that's one of the things that we're excited to work with our data center partners to solve those opportunities and create a better, lower price grid that's reliable, and everybody's got what they need for growth in the future.
So maybe Tod and Tim, both of you are from utility, and you're brothers in the neighborhood of California. One has more renewable, the other actually has more the eyeball like LA and Santa Monica, where Snapchat genuinely have drive up a lot of the demand and pricing for the real estate. So many of the content providers, like many of my friends, actually like to actually place the load where the eyeballs are, which is in your geography, but they also like to kind of like have the renewable energy. So can you two talk about how you may work with each other in terms of creating a strategy for data center?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we're playing around with is, you know, in order to participate in demand response, the load has to move out of our territory. So, but what we're looking at is, well, why couldn't that move to the irrigation district or to PG&E or maybe to another state if it needs to balance the grid out, wherever the problem is, that we could do that. And therefore, we could actually keep the grid reliable. We can import as well renewable generation that you may be having through power purchase agreements, whether it's direct access, which you're talking about, you're already taking advantage of. And I think we need to do more of that. I mean, we were talking with Tim earlier, generation is really becoming a commodity. And as more renewable generation gets integrated into the grid, we need to be able to give those customers that choice so that they can either run it through the utilities, because that's our job, is to balance this load out, right? Because the sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing, something breaks, whatever it is. We have to manage all those ups and downs. And I think the smarter we get and the more resources we tie into that in a smart way, I think we can solve all those problems. Tim?
Yeah, I agree. Tod, when clouds pass over, we have some intermittency issues, the solar's up, the solar's down, then your load can balance our solar resources. And the two working in combination can give a seamless product to the customer, and that's what the customers want.
So we're counting on Cal ISO to help us with that.
Susanna, I'm not trying to, just a question for Tod. Of all the data centers in your territory, what percentage take advantage of demand response? And if so, what's their experience? And if not, why?
Yeah. To my knowledge, I don't know of any, you know.
And why do you think that is?
They're just.
Dave, why do you not take advantage of that
Yeah,
from
why don't
Uconnect?
you?
If we were to have a human error, human failure of some sort, or a machine failure where we had a cascade and we took down a data center, essentially for profit. So we're getting paid to use demand response, and to be paid and encounter a failure would not look good, essentially, to be quite honest. With batteries, storage coming about, we're rethinking it. But batteries take up a whole lot of space.
You need a de-risk DR
And
strategy.
in general, I don't think the payback, what you're going to receive for the demand response program may or may not be that good. The best program we have is our base interruptible program, where you've got 15 minutes to drop load, and you get roughly 10 to 15% discount year round.
I would view all these things as some spectrum of demand response. But if you're trying to manage load and you have a consumer, like, here's how we look at it. If the utility price points are high and the grid is under stress, maybe I don't want to be relying on it. And so that, at that point, I get an incentive to do what I think is lower risk anyway.
Right. Yeah. And that's where it makes sense to have all those other sources of generation.
No, that's a good point, just to dovetail on that. If you look at intermittent pricing as a proxy for grid reliability, if you look at ERCOT today, it's 25x difference in pricing. So it goes up to 80 cents in parts of Texas. If you look at Cal ISO over the last year, same thing, you'll see a 25x. And what the grids and you're part of the utilities, but what NERC and FERC have done is they found that the traditional demand response programs, the traditional kind of curtailment programs aren't keeping up.
Right.
So they're moving to frequency and primary frequency response. And primary frequency response is within 20 seconds response is considered primary frequency. The way we look at it is not from a reliability issue. If you were to go back and look at grid data on Sunday mornings, which I like to do, and you look at drop frequency is when the grid will start to shunt itself. And when you see that frequency drop, that's a good leading indicator of a grid outage. And so we're very focused on it from the reliability perspective. What can we do to brace data centers first from that perspective? Because it's going to be an increasing issue, is our feeling.
But you definitely have to have the ability to either move that data elsewhere or drop that load and have the technical capability that you're not losing your business at the same time. So,
Yep.
yeah. So there's
Which
a way
is
to-
availability is something that Keith is actually very familiar with from Uptime. But then he actually talked to me a little bit earlier before the panel. He said, Susanna, it's not just about availability. It's also about efficiency and some other dynamic system. And a lot of times it's actually about low orchestration in terms of gaining control. So Keith, how about share with us some of the experiences and best practices that you have done, please.
Thank you, Susanna. Yeah, Keith Klesner from Uptime Institute. As the name would imply, we are an organization that is rooted in availability with Uptime. But if anyone knew the founder of Uptime Institute, I'm looking over at Mr. Taylor. He was an ardent advocate, and that was Ken Brill was his name, an ardent advocate of efficiency, right? That he used to say, and I'm not sure this totally holds true, but the best data center is the one you never have to build. But in this day of taking a look at not just the availability, but also thinking about the efficiency of the data center program, it's important not to just think about, I think renewable power a huge advocate of what BSR is doing and what Kelly's advocating, but with renewable energy and renewables in the data center, but just overall resource consumption within the data center, I think is something that we need to take a look at. And it's not just renewable power, and it's not just the PUE of the data center, but it's what is the functionality and the effectiveness of the compute and the resources consumed within that data center. So that's something that Uptime Institute's been focusing on a lot, and for some areas, it highly varies. It could be energy-related, carbon, could be your WE, your water usage effectiveness. And there's a lot of different factors that come into play. It's not just that availability that you can focus on. So I appreciate that came up.
Of course, and I think those are all very key metrics. As many executives are actually here in the room, you absolutely want all the metrics to be transparent to you. I actually call it the Fitbit on your data center. You actually wanted to see them there, and I've actually seen the scorecard. It's actually pretty innovative in terms of being able to actually Fitbit your data center, and hopefully Jakob will help us align them. Because currently now they're not really aligned, even though you get access to them. So with that, I actually like to also ask for a show of hands. How many of you have heard of BSR? Oh, great. Well, Kelly, you have a good audience to know about your...
Almost in double digits.
Yeah.
Sorry, utilities, maybe. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here. And really, I'll give a quick overview of BSR and kind of our role in hoping to enable all of this as we move towards a clean energy economy. So BSR previously stood for Business for Social Responsibility. We are a nonprofit global consultancy network. Been around for about 25 years, helping large Fortune 500 companies look at all sorts of sustainability issues. These could range from everything on the social side, human trafficking, women's empowerment, go into the other side of all sorts of environmental issues. So in my capacity there, I clearly work on the environmental front, and I'm based in our San Francisco office. We have offices international, about 8 different locations, with nearly 300 different corporate members that are part of the BSR network. So we work with all of our members to help them fulfill, set, meet sustainability goals. We like to see the trends that we've seen emerging over the past few years. When we look at environmental sustainability, I like to think that it's no longer just a trend, but hopefully the new normal, that we have companies coming out and setting 100% renewable energy goals. And now we're trying to help companies figure out how to meet those goals. How do they set science-based targets? How do they decrease their carbon footprint? And one of the things we've done in the past 5 years, and I've been there for a little over 2, and had the pleasure of working with Patrick and a few of our other BSR members, is helping companies that have these large data center footprints. This is indeed their digital carbon footprint. They aren't manufacturing things. Everything's in the cloud. So helping them address how they can actually mitigate and decrease their carbon footprint in the larger world. And I think Patrick said it best in terms of this is the biggest infrastructure that's being built. So what we've done is we did a working group about 5 years ago, started with 4 companies, Adobe, HPE, Facebook, and I believe your predecessor, Salesforce, was, Aaron was one of the founders. We named that group Future of Internet Power, with a very simple mission of powering the internet with 100% renewable energy. And since then, we're coming up on year 5 now. We've got 12 companies that are part of this working group, and we meet on a regular basis to try to figure out how we can work with different industry partners to really get to that 100% renewable energy goal and that mission. And one of the ways we do this is working with a number of different industry folks that are here at this panel today, and I recognize a few folks and names out in the audience, to really figure out what are the different tools, resources, and awareness opportunities that companies really need in order to first realize that they should be decreasing their carbon footprint, and then to actually do something about it. We have a lot of companies that are very mature in this respect, that have come out and been the leaders of setting those goals and making 100% renewable energy commitments. And then we have those that are a little bit more on the laggard side. They don't even realize that, that the cloud is something that requires a lot of energy, and it's energy intensive. We're really trying to get both of those groups of companies together, moving forward with those tools and resources to set renewable energy goals and to meet them. And one of the ways that we did that was actually through this conference last year, when Patrick came and launched an initiative that's more of that awareness campaign. It's called the Corporate Co-location and Cloud Buyers Principles. Very long name, working on an acronym, but hopefully, hopefully it's catchy in some respect. What they are 6 different very simple directional statements, simple principles to help companies say, yes, if I want renewable energy at a data center, if I'm a customer of a data center, what are 6 things that I can just put on the table to ask for and negotiate with my data center service provider, with my cloud service provider? And these really are intended to be directional statements to provide an opportunity for that conversation to be had. We're talking about things like choice, like John mentioned. How can we figure out what the choices are for renewables in the area where you're operating? We talk about advocacy as well. Where are there opportunities for both the customer, for Salesforce, to sit down and advocate to either the state or the utility commission with their data center provider about what sort of renewable energy policy they want to see? And the Fitbit that you just mentioned, actually, I think as well is something that's very much on the forefront of these principles, trying to get the data to empower customers to actually realize, how much energy are they using, what can they do in terms of their own capacity to control their energy usage, control the equipment that they're putting in, and then work as efficiently as possible, because as Keith knows, efficiency is very much first and foremost, to then decrease their footprint and look for renewable options on top of that. So this was something we launched last year, and we've seen kind of a doubling over of commitment from both customers of data center providers as well as the providers themselves. And we're really pleased to see some of the uptake of that, but excited to share that more with you all today and in further conversations to figure out different ways to collaborate.
Thank you, Kelly. Then we all know that something happened in our country. So, Kelly, can you comment a little bit about what impact have you actually seen with the Trump stress test and exiting the Paris climate plan? That a lot of great momentum and wonderful folks that fundamentally believe, and actually I think I believe in one thing. I think the cleanest data center is the one that you do not need to build, because you're not depleting any resources around the world. So, Kelly, I like you a lot, and I know you're going to be a new mommy. I don't want to stress you out and have an accident here. But can you share with us the reality of actually currently now going on with your members in the United States and maybe a little bit around the world? Are you seeing an impact, and how can we all help to do the right thing?
Yeah, certainly more concerned for the next generation these days, absolutely.
Thank you.
Some of you may remember the pledge from last year, White House Business Act on Climate pledge under the Obama administration, where there was a number of companies that came forward and made a public pledge to have different environmental sustainability initiatives. That was, 2015. What we're looking at now is, even back in December, the Paris Agreement was a huge success. BSR worked very closely with a number of companies to help have a private sector voice at COP21, and we were really pleased with the results. Since then, we've seen a number of companies, it's that now more than ever statement that I keep hearing again and again. And we really have seen the private sector step up to say, okay, well, if we're not going to have the public sector in the U.S. administration be that guiding light towards fulfilling our commitment to Paris, then we need to fill a gap, and we have power to do so. And we certainly have the resources, the investments needed, and it's not just about doing the right thing, it's about what's making business sense. And I think hearing up here today, willing to pay a little bit more, knowing the cost is going to go down to renewables, working with different utilities to find partnership to figure out how you can actually, make deals that make sense for companies, is certainly something that we're seeing as an ongoing driving force to how the private sector can kind of fill that gap when we are seeing the lack of commitment and push from the public sector. And the last note I'll say on that is we do have, in our capacity with Future of Internet Power and BSR, we work with a number of other NGOs on what we call the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. And that's with our partners over at the World Wildlife Fund, WRI, World Resources Institute, and the Rocky Mountain Institute. So together, the four of us, we have an annual summit, which will be coming up this September, and that will be, a group of, again, utilities, corporate buyers of renewables, developers, et cetera. And we're seeing a lot of, the coal country utilities saying, we're still on the path to clean energy, regardless of what we're seeing, in DC. We very much still see the financial benefit and the environmental benefit of pursuing clean energy sources. And I think that's going to be hopefully the ongoing marching theme of a number of folks in this room, and something that should pick up on.
And you're going to be with us, right?
Yes.
Even though she's actually giving birth in September.
I'll be back.
Yes. And actually, I believe that's event in Santa Clara. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
Yes,
It's in
and
Santa
it's
Clara.
going to be joined with virtual. Hopefully, we'll see some of you there. So with that, actually, I'm very happy to have Dale with us today. He actually just came back from China, and China actually stepped up ahead of America right now in terms of actually the climate plan. Well, I guess I should be pleased because I'm Chinese and I was born in Hong Kong, that my country is now stepping up finally to actually do something right in terms of the environment. It saddened me, however, actually, from a climate plan perspective, from a reality, that China is actually showing a lot more investments in many of the companies and efforts. So hopefully, we're still going to continue to win the Olympics in terms of the competitiveness of America. So Dale actually and I chatted a little bit before the panel today. Some of the things that he is going to share with you, I really like each of you to actually pay attention to, is actually the globalization of the standards and experiences actually see in terms of traveling, working both in America and actually traveling in Shanghai and China, in terms of seeing the importance of it. As we actually start planning the design in the bill, which we'll go to the last two speakers here, something that's actually very important to be paying attention to globalization trend. So please, Dale.
Well, thank you, thank you. One thing that struck me both in this panel and the previous panel is one of the fundamental issues seems to be communication or lack thereof, especially across disciplines or across organizations. We talk about it all the time at Data Center Dynamics relative to facilities and IT don't talk, and that's always the first step in an efficiency or sustainability program, is a continuous improvement team that spans the disciplines. But, hear about utilities, no data centers are taking advantage of DR. Well, are we talking about what it would take to get a data center to do DR? That to me, we have an industry that has the capability, as Patrick pointed out, probably surpasses any other industry in the US in terms of our flexibility. And we have that flexibility, not because utilities have encouraged it or given us incentives, because we do it for a reliability standpoint, but we can take that capability and use it productively in conjunction with utilities. And it may even be, as you pointed out, a potential for increasing a reliability. So I think that what's important is it might not just be a financial incentive. Maybe there's a different incentive, but the fact that we do not take advantage of DR is because we have absolutely no, or very few incentives or little incentives to do it. So why, like the gentleman in the back said, why should he take a risk to bring his data center down, even though it's a pretty small risk, in exchange for a lack of an incentive? But it perhaps doesn't need to be a financial incentive if we talk more. And then lastly, I want to talk about data center operators and vendors. We had a conference actually with RMI about it at the turn of the century when power supplies were the big deal. The average server power supply was about 70% efficient at its rated capacity, and it dropped off significantly below that at real life operating conditions. And the manufacturers of the servers said, well, of course we could put the same power supply, well, not the same, but similar power supplies that we're already putting in PCs, but the market's not asking for it. And then the market was there. All the operators say, hey, if you guys sold us servers with more efficient power supplies, we would buy them. But nobody was talking. And I think that it's important to recognize that the market has tremendous pull. And if we get together and talk, we can drive the vendors towards what we want. And I think that open standards like OCP and Scorpio are a mechanism for doing that, but because we don't talk together, we don't have harmonization in those open standards internationally. So we're working on a pilot project to harmonize international standards, and we've picked a couple of areas, and one of them is a liquid-cooled rack spec. Another example of a technology that's been ripe for probably like 5 years. We use it in supercomputers. In every one of those cases, it's a unique proprietary solution that gets thrown away along with the computer at the refresh cycle. The point is that a harmonized standard across borders, say with US and China, that specified an open standard for liquid cooling could drive that market forward to higher efficiency. Anyway, we'll be talking more about that tomorrow. But I see the need for communication across our disciplines, and in this case, since this panel is data centers and utilities, more communications there. We can solve each other's problems very cost effectively and enhance our environment.
Bruce, can you share with us many of the design principles, multidisciplinary work that you have actually done?
Well, after 27 people have spoken, I'm not sure there's much to say still.
Come on, Bruce.
I think
you can do it.
You're up here. You have to say something. Well, first of all, I want to say over the last 10 years, say since 2007, when the EPA submitted its report to Congress explaining how much power we're using in our data centers, that I've seen extraordinary change and innovation in the industry. And
Indeed.
the leading data center owners and operators, the big technology companies, the big internet companies, many of the big co-location operators have made tremendous strides to become much more energy efficient in the way they operate their data centers. On the other hand, there are just as many data centers out there, big ones and little ones, enterprise data centers, research and development data centers that are not paying attention. And they're not making any kind of effort to take advantage of the utility programs that are made available to them. The incentives don't seem to matter. They seem to fall off to the last priority. In the case of co-location operators, they're often too busy acquiring new data centers to worry about how their older data centers are operating.
You got that one, Dave?
Got it. In the case of enterprise operators, well, you know, data processing really isn't their core competency, so they like to stick to their core competency to make themselves more competitive in the market. They don't pay a lot of attention to their data center energy efficiency. And there are some data centers out there that are still late 1990s vintage. I mean, all over Northern California, which is probably one of the most advanced data center communities in the world. There are all kinds of data centers around here, and I've been in many of them, that are not doing anything to become more energy efficient. And if some of the names that I might throw out to you of the owners of these facilities might surprise you, that they would let things go like that. So to move on from that, you know, how are we going to try to get these data centers to catch up and make some changes? And I'd rather stick to the regulatory and the incentives environment first before I start talking about technical solutions, because I think that really might be at the core of it. The utilities in Southern California, Northern California are all driven by the California Energy Commission. And the public utility commissions in this country really drive the decisions that we make in terms of how we're going to drive data centers to make the right decisions. And I can't say that things are as positive as they could be. You know, we've developed very, very interesting and powerful data center energy efficiency programs all over the country. In fact, they're old news. I've been in several data centers 4 or 5 times myself. And the data centers say, well, we've had several teams from the utility in here to take a look at it with different types of solutions or approaches. And they still haven't done anything. And there are demand response programs that are very, very interesting as well. You pay people just to be ready in case. And I mean, there's somebody on this panel today who is in a demand response program. And I'm really, really proud to see that he's got an example to tell everybody about. He's up next. And, excuse me, I didn't get that.
Thanks. I'll give you $10.
Anyway, but there are other areas too, like auto demand response. There are permanent load shifts where you just put in some thermal energy storage to get off of the grid when in the middle of the day when the demand's so high, and make some power at nighttime to take care of yourself in the daytime. And the self-generation. That's my favorite topic for reasons I'll get to later, but you know, we've got we just had, I think, $500 million dedicated to self-generation in California by the California Energy Commission 2 months ago. And they've assigned 80% of that $500 million to energy storage, which is interesting. I mean, we've got to get these intermittent sources of power like solar energy and wind energy, you know, to the point where they're stable and can provide for the data centers. But excuse me for looking at you guys and blaming you guys for being utilities. I'm sorry. But you know, I think we still need a lot of attention to the 20% that you've assigned power to for new generation capabilities, and you know, generating power on your own site and taking care of your own demand. And data centers have been very responsive in one way to the demand for energy efficiency. And I think that sooner or later, we're bound to run upon the demand, I mean, the requirement for taking care of your own demand for power and moving to a distributed generation model in the United States of America that extends beyond data centers. As Peter Gross was talking about it earlier today, that extends to all big users of electrical power to generate your own power.
Thank you, Bruce. Yep.
And that's a very important part of it.
No, that's important. Dave, can you share with us some of the example that you were educating me a little bit earlier with the audience in terms of some of the work that you as the chief officer of your company, what are some of the efforts that you lead? I thought it's actually very disruptive and innovative, so please.
Yeah, thanks, Susanna. Yeah, Dave Leonard, Chief Data Center Officer of ViaWest. You can enjoy that name a while longer. We got announced that we got acquired by Peak 10 and GI Partners last week, but who knows?
Congratulations.
Who knows?
Was it a cash deal?
My portion of it was cash.
Oh, that's important. That's all it matters. Yay!
So,
Dave, I'll join you for dinner tonight.
at ViaWest, we tend to focus on the act locally part of the think globally, act locally, because I am an old guy and I want to see results in my lifetime, and the global stuff doesn't seem to move very fast. So what I do is look at our data centers that have assets in it and say, what can those assets do beyond their primary use? There's two major assets in our data center that sit there unutilized, and they're horrifically expensive. One is batteries. So we're looking at what kind of battery technology and what will be the evolution of battery technology to allow time shifting and consume energy from the grid at a more appropriate time than all the time. So we can not only have a better than 100% load factor, we can have a load factor when you know it, which utilities should love. But the one that I really want to focus on is generators. We've got these generators sitting there, and in a good utility environment, they're never used, and they're hugely expensive, and they're an asset that people don't freaking use because nobody likes demand response. Well, we love it. In a certain geography, we love it. PG&E, the other one, Portland General Electric, they have a demand response program they call dispatchable standby generation. And instead of like in demand response programs where you go off the grid when the grid needs you to go off, they actually say feed the grid. So we're their largest independent power producer on the grid. And ask yourself the question, when is a diesel generator the most energy efficient, cost efficient, greenest power solution ever possible? And the answer is when that diesel generator causes you to not build the next power plant. The energy spent in building a power plant, the loss of green spent in building a power plant, no matter how energy efficient or how green that power plant is huge. PG&E has avoided building peaker plants by allowing their DSG program, dispatchable standby generation, easy for me to say, to be spinning reserve. And so it counts as the mandatory spinning reserve. How many times do they ask us to execute it? None. They test. So we don't pollute the environment, but we kept PG&E from having to build the next generation plant. Very frustrating that no other utility in the United States that I'm aware of does that program, because it increases our reliability. It's something that everybody should be doing. And then we could unleash these thousands of generators that are sitting there doing nothing all the time. So that's that act locally passion.
I think you have.
The best
to
power
finalize.
plant is the
just-
power plant you don't have to build.
Just to quantify what Dave's saying.
So we need to actually open this up to the audience for a second, if we may, because we're running out of time.
So I get to ask the first question, Bruce? Great. Dave Murray, are you out there? At Hydro-Quebec. Great. So we all Americans just hang out and talk about U.S. It would be really insightful to hear from our friendly neighbor, who I may actually move to your country real fast. If things continue out here. Can you, seriously, can you share with us your perspective in renewable energy, David? That would be great.
So renewables, I'm listening to the conversation about reliability and, environmental discussions. I think we're privileged at Hydro-Quebec, so not a lot of people know what Hydro-Quebec is doing. So we're the biggest provider of hydroelectricity in Canada. We're actually bigger than all the provinces together. So 99.7% of our electricity is produced from water. So we are already part of that game since the last 75 years. But we're not stopping the debate at that place. We're developing batteries. So I'll be installing in my network 1.2 megawatt batteries in order to do peak shaving. Different rates at different times, so it's less expensive for our customers. We're developing the house of the future I was talking earlier, using all the software technology, obviously using solar. So developing, we actually develop a vehicle to home. So we have this Jeep Cherokee that I drove connecting to the house, and you can use the energy in exchange with our smart meters to the grid. We're offering, companies to erase themselves at peak period, and it's good money for them, so it's a good return on investment. We've erased over almost 200 megawatts just in the last 6 months, so we're really privileged, I guess, because we're focusing obviously on the environment, how reliable it is. We're working on innovations. We have 700 researchers working in Quebec and trying to shape the future of the energy. And I guess at the end, people don't realize, but we can offer this at 2 to 3 cents kilowatt hour, and there's no catch. That's what we're producing and we're offering to people coming to Quebec. So 2 to 3 cents kilowatt hours US, that's what we can offer, and we're green at the same time. So for me, listening to the conversation is quite interesting because we're kind of we've been, I guess, isolated somewhere. Maybe it's the snow and the cold, but we've been pretty good in working in the sustainability. Thank you.
That's amazing, 2 to 3 cents. And then actually also what Tim shared with us earlier about Imperial. That would be great. So first of all, I want to thank all the panelists here, and we are here still to answer some of the questions that may come out from the audience. Please. Can you tell us your name and then
Please
the question?
keep comments as short as you can.
Was that specifically for me?
Yes.
Oh, we always
Okay.
like to hear from you.
Okay, so my name is Henry Wong. Here as a consultant, even though I've been in this industry for well over 30 years. One of the things that I fail to see or hear from any one of you, along with the previous panel, is the need for, one, integration from the different industries, okay, both grid, utilities, governments, producers, manufacturers, and operators.
And your question
Each one of them have become single source entities promoting their specific contributions, and none of them, similar to what Dale was indicating, talk to each other to find integration mechanisms of ensuring both availability, delivery of the computing resources that we need to go ahead and provide. Are you or any one of you attached to a forum or sponsoring a forum to allow that integration and communication to happen?
Redfish.
Yeah, I think that's a great point from an industry. One of the things that we recognized early in our journey is if you look at traditional data centers, the engineers of data centers are not utility engineers. They don't understand utilities. They don't understand. And that's one of the things that we sought, and that was a driver for the vertical integration that we did specifically around that point. So the ability to have utility experts along with product and electrical PhDs, along with data center experts to drive that integration, because it's woefully missing in the industry. When you go out and design, you know, a traditional data center, the utility is just not something that is well understood from the data center perspective.
Let's do it.
But I agree with you that there's tremendous need for more collaboration like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody wins, right?
Yeah, I disagree with the premise that no one's trying. I think myself and Jakob are both merchants. That's what we do. Clients come to us with a huge computing load and say, I want this fast, I want it cheap, I want it flexible, I want it renewable, I want it sustainable, and I want you to guarantee everything. And I'm not going to tell you how much I'm going to use. And it's a tough problem to solve, right? And so it's our job to integrate all that and pull all these pieces together to try and put that into a solution that we have to compete in the market for. And so we're going to choose the utilities that we work with based upon who works with us.
Yeah.
We know we have.
And I think, okay.
Hello, my name is Samuel Farage. I work for a company called Twangru. We are based out of Vancouver, Canada. My question to anybody actually in the panel who could answer it, we heard about how data center and utility could drive efficiency and their role of contribute to driving efficiency. But I haven't heard yet how a third-party company could contribute to this movement. For example, like using a DCIM software that provide information that allows the data centers or utility companies to drive that efficiency down. Anybody could answer.
Yeah, I think the opportunities are everywhere through the value chain that I described. And I think counterintuitively, the challenge is actually not in the complex math that needs to go into solving how to optimize. It's actually the business model innovation of how to get the product to a minimum viable state and get it into the company that is in charge of pulling the different levers. And so some of the places I'm most excited about have to do with even things like analyzing our own footprint, because if we can get better data about real-time carbon footprint, we can start making decisions in a more fast way. And if we can start doing that, maybe that opens up a conversation about how to think about procuring energy, how to think about locating data centers. So yes, to your question, anywhere that there's a breakdown in efficiency, which is, I believe, pretty much every step, every handoff, every miscommunication point, to Dale's point, in the value chain, and don't get lost in the fun math of it. Get lost in the challenge of getting into the end customer who actually can make use of the tool.
Patrick, can I add? Yeah, as well. I don't think efficiency can be bought, unfortunately. Any singular tool or any singular product solution isn't going to buy efficiency. It takes leadership. So, for example, I'm just going to highlight a case, right, in Hillsboro, Oregon, where a data center there with Infomart that they were developing, and they had a client linked in, and they said, we want to show and we want to have an efficient deployment of IT. And they said, well, it's not just the building, it's not just the servers and the compute within that building. We're actually going to build and manage this and put metrics around that so we actually have leadership and have accountability to that. So I'd love a good DCIM tool that can tell me how I'm operating, but you still need a team to manage that and push towards that continuous improvement.
Another great example of leadership is Qualcomm in San Diego. And taking that back to on-site generation, Qualcomm has, and it's recorded and written on the internet at the EPA site as a case study of on-site generation, where they've got a 15 megawatt on-site cogeneration power plant that provides power for their data centers as well as their office buildings and the remainder of their campus there. And they use that, the power going to their campus as redundant available power as backup for a failure in one of the generators. So they've got effectively a critical power plant there operating continuously. What they do there is take a new paradigm and move beyond energy efficiency in the data center and save so much energy in producing their own power that it's a tremendous area that I think we need to have more focus on, where a cogeneration plant can be as much as 80% efficient by using the waste heat coming off of the big gas turbines to make chilled water to cool the data center, to make steam to run through steam turbines to make more electricity, and even sell back to the utility if they'll buy it back or use it on their own campus. And finally, to take the waste heat, hot water, cold water, the waste, the low grade steam coming off of that on their campus for other purposes, and replace the other equipment that it would be required to make that hot and cold water and steam on site to, with their own device there, instead of having to pay the electricity to make it happen. That's where you get a 70 to 80% efficiency in an on-site generation plant, instead of the efficiency you get from the grid.
Bruce, we have to wrap. I'm sorry.
2 minutes, 40% power generator and minus 10% in the
We're
grid.
going to keep this on time. Thank you. Thank you very much. And
40% minus 10. That's the grid.
Well, Dave, we can talk at over dinner because John's buying.
Okay, so first of all of us want to thank you for attending today, and we also want to thank Bruce for inviting us here. Please join me with a show of hands for the panelists. Thank you.